All right, let's go ahead and get started with today's webinar, which is titled Semi-Retired: How to Find Part-Time Remote Work. Here's a quick overview of what we'll be covering in this webinar today. First, we'll establish a bit of context for this webinar by discussing some of the trends that we've seen over recent years in regards to people delaying retirement or working while semi-retired. Then we'll go into some of the options that you could potentially consider if you are thinking about working while semi-retired, but don't want to, maybe jump back into the traditional full-time 9 to 5 in-person job. Next, we'll talk about some strategies that you can employ to find target companies that are offering the type of work environment you might be seeking, like part-time remote work. And then we'll discuss some important strategies to consider when you actually begin applying for jobs that align with your interests and preferences. And then lastly, we'll conclude with our live audience Q&A so that you have a chance to ask your questions directly with one of our career experts. So let's take a quick look at some of the unretirement trends that we've been seeing over the last few years. So the reason that we are discussing this topic in the first place is because, our world is changing and so are many people's views on retirement. And I'm sure that some of the points on this slide resonate with many of you watching this webinar right now. Many people are deciding to work longer for a variety of reasons, which we'll touch on a few of them here in a minute. And many people are pursuing a more gradual transition into retirement rather than abruptly retiring as soon as they're eligible. Also, a lot of folks, many of whom might have retired during the great retirement trend that began during the pandemic, are also deciding to unretire by finding some type of work, typically part-time, flexible, and/or remote work options that align with their desired semi-retired lifestyle. Now, those last three bullet points are some of the most common reasons why a person would decide to work longer, unretire, or gradually transition into retirement. And again, some of you might relate to those points. There are people out there who have built a career that they're very passionate about and proud of, and they might struggle with, simply retiring when they feel like they still have a lot left in the tank. So they decide to work longer, unretire, or semi-retire so they can continue to pursue that passion and fulfillment that they've found in their professional life. Others are motivated by financial reasons, like a rise in the cost of living and economic uncertainties, which have caused many to want or sometimes need to supplement their income with part-time work so that they can live more comfortably than they might be able to otherwise. But regardless of your reasoning, we're hoping that this webinar can give you some helpful insights into how you can find viable part-time, flexible, and remote work options if you are considering or have made the decision already to unretire or semi-retire. Okay, so now we'll go over some of those viable options that you could consider if you're thinking about working in retirement. So if you're thinking about unretiring or semi-retiring, you need to consider your different potential options and think about how those options align with your preferences. For instance, if you simply want or need a little extra income each month, a part-time job in just about any field might suffice. But if you're looking for something a bit more challenging or engaging, a freelance, contract, or fractional role might make more sense for you. Or if you really want to pursue a passion, entrepreneurship could be your best choice. And we'll go over some of the nuances of each of these options. That way you can think about what might be best for you and your situation and the lifestyle you're hoping to live in semi-retirement. And do keep in mind that some of these options overlap, like the first one on the list. That's a great example, part-time jobs. Part-time jobs really refer to any job where you aren't working a full, 35 to 40 hours a week, and there's a bit more flexibility in your schedule. A part-time job can also mean that you are, officially an employee of an organization, or you could also be working in a freelance, contract, or fractional capacity and be considered part-time, which is an example of where the overlap I mentioned comes in. And the responsibilities of a part-time job can also vary pretty widely from, lower commitment roles like perhaps in retail or customer service to, more intense kind of project-based work that might require a higher level of, industry knowledge and skills. But regardless, if you want to transition gradually into retirement or be semi retired, part time is probably what you'd want to consider. But you need to determine how many hours you'd reasonably expect yourself to work each week as you search for those viable options. Then we have freelance and contract work, which again can also be part time. And it refers to work that is typically temporary and project based, where people provide services to multiple clients in the case of freelance work, or a single company or client in the case of contract work for a set period of time. Now, freelance and contract work does differ from being, a part-time employee of a company because you are usually self-employed, manage your own schedule, and are responsible for things like taxes and your benefits. Freelancers and contract workers usually control or have control over the type and amount of work they take on, but their income and job stability can vary pretty widely depending on client demand and project availability. So that's important to keep in mind. Freelance and contract work tends to be best for experienced professionals who have a specific set of skills that they can potentially offer companies or clients. So it typically works best if you are targeting freelance or contract work that aligns with the skills you've already honed throughout your career. Then there is fractional work, which refers to a type of employment where someone offers their expertise or services to a company on a part time basis, usually at an executive level or in a specialized skill position, almost like working in an interim capacity. And unlike freelancers or contractors who often focus on project-based work, fractional workers are usually hired to take on sort of an ongoing strategic role, but only for a fraction of the time that a full-time employee would commit. Hence the name fractional. And fractional work can be ideal for experienced professionals who want the flexibility of part-time work, but still want to contribute to the strategy and leadership of an organization, like perhaps as they gradually transition into retirement. And then next we have entrepreneurship. Entrepreneurship is an option that I'm sure many of you are familiar with, but maybe haven't considered as an option for your semi-retirement. But if you think about it, just like working as a freelancer or contractor, which can be considered a form of entrepreneurship, running your own business can offer flexibility and control over your work hours while also allowing you to supplement your income. And in fact, entrepreneurship in retirement, assuming you aren't choosing something that would require, sort of a large upfront investment, can potentially provide some great financial benefits and allow you to pursue a passion while still providing the freedom and flexibility that we typically think of when we think about retirement. And then just generally speaking, we have, remote and flexible options, which have grown in prevalence and popularity ever since the pandemic, and can also encompass all of the previous options we've talked about, similar to the way that part-time overlaps with other options. Truthfully, I could have mentioned this in the last section because the increase in remote work is another reason why so many people have considered semi-retirement or unretirement. While someone who has worked a long career, especially if most or all of it was in person, they might want to retire so they no longer need to go in the office. They might still find the ability to work remotely as an appealing option to transition into retirement. Now, that doesn't mean your only option for semi-retirement is remote work. Plenty of semi-retirees also work in person, but remote work can be a great option for people who are no longer interested in going into a physical workplace. So, as you can see on this slide, there are a lot of different options to consider, which is important because you want to think about, what best situation for you might be so that you can understand what types of roles to target as you look for semi-retired work. So once you've taken the time to determine your semi-retired preferences and you know what your target roles might be, you want to make sure that you're keeping them in mind throughout your search. Regardless of what job search board you use in your job search, you want to make sure that you are leveraging any advanced search options or filters that are available to you so you can narrow down your results to the most relevant options, meaning the ones that meet your criteria or your preferences. Now, keep in mind that you might need to be somewhat flexible and adaptable with your search criteria because using too many filters can sometimes end up yielding very few viable results. So try to consider which preferences are most crucial to you and your needs. And also try to be a bit creative in the different keywords or terms that you're typing into the search bar on different job search boards. You don't need to just search by specific job titles. You can also try to list different skills or other identifiers that could help you find viable options that meet your needs. And on the slide here is an example of the advanced search feature on FlexJobs. So if, for example, I wanted something that was freelance, fully remote, and had a flexible schedule, I would indicate freelance in the job type drop-down menu. I would indicate 100% remote work in the remote work level drop-down menu, and then flexible schedule in the work schedule drop-down. From there, I could test out, different variations of search terms and toggle other filters on or off to find different combinations that seem to work best for me. But, regardless, knowing the path you want to take and then making sure that you are searching in a way that yields results that align with your search criteria, like using advanced search filters, can help you avoid a lot of confusion and headache and wasted time during your search for a job in semi-retirement. So just like knowing what types of roles you might want to target, it's also helpful to target specific companies because then you can narrow down some of your search efforts, as well as potentially network and build relationships with people already working at those organizations. So let's talk about finding flexible companies now. After you have determined your target roles, a good next step is to identify companies that offer roles that match your needs and preferences, which very well might include remote, part-time, and flexible roles. One of the things that we do at FlexJobs is regularly publish blog articles that list out top companies for different types of roles by, combing through our job listing data. So I highly recommend keeping an eye on our blog so you can review these types of lists, particularly if you are interested in remote and flexible work, which is obviously our area of focus. And another good resource is an organization called the Flex Index, which provides a pretty comprehensive database of company workplace flexibility policies. So as you find potential companies of interest, you can check them against the Flex Index database to see if their policies match what you're looking for. Also, considering that we are talking about semi-retirement, it makes sense to consider targeting some age-friendly companies. And I'll note here that I included a link in the resources tab in big marker here for an organization that is called the Age Friendly Institute, which offers a wide range of resources for older workers, including a list of certified age-friendly companies, which could be a good place to start creating your target company list. Similarly, I also included an article from FlexJobs in the resources tab called The 20 Best Companies with Flexible Jobs for Older Workers, which is an example of the type of lists that we regularly publish, like I mentioned a moment ago. Then, in terms of other companies of interest, you can simply think about some of the companies that you like for whatever reason. Like maybe you appreciate their products, admire their mission, or have interacted with them in some way during your career. And then you can add them to your target list because you might enjoy being a part of their organization. And as you add companies to your target list, you can bookmark their hiring pages and regularly check them to see if they have any open roles available that meet what you're looking for and that you could be a good fit for. And then lastly, word of mouth referrals, which essentially means tapping into your network, which is something that we'll talk about in more detail later on. But basically, think about your professional network and consider reaching out to people who work in fields that are, related to the options you're targeting, or maybe work at companies that appeal to you, and then try to get some insights into what it's like to work there and if there are any teams or roles that could be a good fit for you. If you have good relationships with people who are sort of willing to go to bat for you, so to speak, you could end up getting some internal referrals for open roles, which can really help increase your chances of landing an interview. Either way, it's helpful to employ some strategies to identify target companies as well as target roles so you can be focused and intentional with your job search and avoid wasting time. As you progress through your job search, it's also important that you keep an eye out for potential job scams. Job scams are an unfortunate but very real part of the job search process, and scammers often like to target job seekers who are looking for remote roles because it's much easier to scam someone when you never have to meet them face to face. So, outlined on this slide are some of the biggest red flags that you'll want to look out for when job searching. So, let's go through each of these briefly. One of the biggest signs that you've potentially encountered a scam is if it's difficult to find information that should be readily available, like a company name or job description. The bad news is, though, AI is making it much easier for scammers to appear legitimate. So just because a company name and job description is provided, it doesn't guarantee that the job is legitimate. So it's important to do some additional verifying, which I will explain at the end of this slide. The next warning sign or red flag to look out for is unrealistic salary offering. And we could also lump in jobs that offer, job offers that say they only require a small amount of work or very few hours. Basically, anything that sounds kind of too good to be true should raise your level of caution. Too good to be true offers have been one of the most common tricks that scammers have used for a very long time. Then we have an overwhelming sense of urgency. Like if the person contacting you about the job is encouraging you to, act fast so you don't miss your chance or is trying to kind of rush you through the process. This is another very common scam tactic because the scammer is hoping that the sense of urgency will cloud your judgment and get you to ignore or miss the red flags that should have been obvious to you otherwise. The next red flag is unsolicited and immediate job offers, which requires a little bit of explaining. Yes, it is possible that a recruiter could reach out to you if they maybe, saw your resume or LinkedIn profile and think that you could be a good fit for a role that they're trying to fill, but they will ask you to apply for the role and go through their company's established process. If someone is reaching out to you for a job that you didn't apply to and just offering you the job without any type of interview or maybe just kind of a quick phone screen or text-based interview, that is a very strong likelihood you've encountered a scam. Then we have one that I alluded to in that last bullet point, which is text only communication. If you applied for a job and got contacted by a recruiter or hiring manager, and your only interactions with them are via text, meaning email, text message, or chat, then they offer you the job without ever having some type of face to face interaction, including over video conferencing. That should be a big warning sign for you. Yes, it is possible that you might encounter text or chat-based interviews as part of the initial screening process, but there should then be some type of formal interview later on in the process that includes a face-to-face interaction or multiple face-to-face interactions. And then finally, we have requests for money or sensitive information. Keep in mind that the primary goal of scammers is to either get money from you now or be able to steal money from you later, including by stealing your identity. So if someone is telling you that you need to pay some type of application fee, you need to purchase your own equipment using your own money, or asks you for highly sensitive information early on in the process, that should be a huge red flag for you. Now, in terms of the sensitive information, yes, legitimate employers will need some details about you to, verify your employment eligibility and set up direct deposit, but that type of thing comes at the very end of the hiring process and is usually conducted through some type of secure document signing platform. You also, along these same lines, want to keep an eye out for anyone telling you that they will send you a check that you can cash in your bank account in order to buy equipment from a specific website. This is a very common scam tactic where you will then, deposit the check. It looks like the money clears. You make the purchase with the website that they told you to using that money, but then it turns out the check never actually clears because the process takes a while at your bank, and the equipment you purchased never arrives. And then I'll also add in one more with in terms of requests for sensitive information, VPN scams, where someone tells you that you need to log into their specific VPN to apply for a job. These scams often end up with you accidentally giving the scammer access to your computer desktop so that they can steal, your passwords, maybe hack your accounts, or find other sensitive information that could be valuable to them. So all of these things are, red flags that you want to make sure to look out for. But I'll now give you a couple quick and easy ways that you can verify job opportunities that you encounter so that you can keep yourself safe. Because not all job sites vet the listings on their site like FlexJobs does. So if you come across an opportunity, whether on a job board or from someone reaching out to you, you should go to your search engine of choice, whether it be, Google or Bing or what have you, and then type in that company's name and the word careers. That should bring you to the company's actual website and internal hiring page. And then if you find the job in question on their site, you can apply for it directly through that company's actual website to help ensure your safety. And you could also try to search for the company name and or the job title and the word scam to see if maybe any Better Business Bureau complaints or law enforcement reports pop up. And then another thing you can do if someone is maybe reaching out to you about an opportunity, check to see if their email address is from an actual company domain rather than, like a Gmail address, Yahoo, or something similar. And then you can also look to see if they are listed on the company's directory, if they have one on their website, or in the company's people tab on their LinkedIn profile. So all of these methods can be incredibly useful to kind of vet potential opportunities, but you do still need to make sure to keep an eye out for any potential red flags. Okay, so once you've determined your ideal type of role and I've identified some potential companies to target in your search, it's time to start creating a job search game plan of sorts and then putting that plan into action. So let's go over some effective application strategies as we close out our webinar. We already talked about determining the type of role that you want to target, but as you plan to initiate your job search, it's important that you are comparing your current qualifications to the ones you would need to obtain one of your target roles. And then kind of calibrate your resume, your cover letter, and other job search assets like your LinkedIn profile accordingly. What I mean by this is you need to sort of think about your audience, and your audience are recruiters and hiring managers looking to fill your target roles. And then try to convey the skills, experiences, and accomplishments that you possess from your career that will be most relevant and impactful to that audience. I typically recommend that you create a base resume of sorts that is already tailored to the type of role you're targeting, and then make a copy of your resume for each application that you can then tailor a bit further to that specific job, which we'll talk about in greater detail on the next slide. But by comparing your qualifications to your target role and understanding how your skills, experience, and accomplishments align with your target role, you'll be able to effectively communicate your fit in a relevant way so you can position yourself as a strong candidate. And then, like I mentioned a moment ago, the same goes for your online assets, like your LinkedIn profile or other job search profiles. These online profiles tend to be a bit broader than your resume in terms of the experience and qualifications that you're sharing, but they should still be calibrated in order to appeal to your audience. Calibrating in this way can also be a useful step in countering potential issues related to ageism because you can highlight your most recent and relevant experience on your resume going back, just 10 to 15 years and adjust it so you don't accidentally appear to be overqualified. Also, when comparing your qualifications with your target roles, you want to keep an eye out for any potential skills gaps. There might be certain skills or experience that you could be missing, so pay attention to those and try to develop a plan like, taking courses or maybe volunteering to try to proactively bridge those gaps so they don't hold you back in your job search. You certainly don't need to meet 100% of the listed qualifications, but you don't want to pursue target roles where there are a lot of large gaps to bridge. So try to aim for, 60+% of qualifications and do your best to fill any gaps that you possibly can. And then, like I mentioned, when talking about scams, make sure that vetting and verifying any opportunities that you come across is part of your job search plan. And if you plan to watch out for scams, it will become a habit, and you'll be able to do it quickly and effectively to keep yourself as safe as possible. So these are all critical things to keep in mind as you start to lay out your job search strategy and create a plan for how to proceed. But now let's go a little bit deeper into some of the specific strategies you can employ to help land a role that will meet your semi-retired needs. All right, so actual strategies that you can employ to help improve your chances of getting hired. First on the list is increase your visibility, which also pairs well with the next one, tapping into your network. So I'll discuss them sort of in tandem here. One of the best ways to both increase your visibility and tap into your network is to ramp up your engagement on social networking sites like LinkedIn. If you start following people that are, doing the type of work that you want to be doing and companies that you might like to work at, you can begin to strategically increase your visibility by, liking things that they post, leaving supportive comments on their posts, and sharing their posts with your own network because they will be alerted each time that you do those things. And then as you gain comfortability doing that, you can start to also, create and share your own organic posts on topics that are relevant to your field or target roles. And then you can start connecting and messaging with people that you would like to build relationships with. And the same thing goes for people, in your existing network that maybe you've fallen out of touch with. You can try to reconnect with them by working to, re-engage and reestablish the relationship. And whether you're trying to connect with a new person or reestablish an old relationship, try to go into it with the relationship at the forefront of your mind. People can figure it out pretty quickly if you're only looking for favors. So you need to show some genuine interest in and appreciation for connecting with them. And as you build relationships with people or reestablish relationships, you'll have the chance to start sharing about yourself and your own goals. And then they might be able to offer advice, maybe introduce you to someone who could help you, or even potentially give you a referral to a possible job opening that you might not have found otherwise. So make sure to not neglect your network and spend some time trying to increase your visibility. The next strategy to consider is niche job boards. And in the same way that FlexJobs is a job board specifically designed for those who are interested in remote and flexible work options, there are a lot of different niche job boards out there that you can try to leverage. So consider searching for ones that might meet your needs. Again, using your search engine of choice, you can simply type in your industry or job title of interest along with the words job boards, and you're likely to find some viable options. Just make sure that you're keeping yourself safe because, like I mentioned previously, not all job boards vet their job postings. So make sure you vet and verify every opportunity you find. Next on our list is to tailor your materials for each job. Just like we talked about on the last slide, you need to think about your audience and then tailor your resume and cover letter for each individual job. I recommend using that base resume strategy that I mentioned previously. And then when you find specific jobs that you want to apply for, carefully analyze the job description and then further tailor and customize your application materials so they reflect what will be most important and impactful to your audience hiring for that specific job. You can often focus the bulk of your tailoring efforts on your professional summary and key skills section at the top of your resume, but you might also want to review your bulleted descriptions of past jobs to see if there are specific skills or accomplishments that you want to emphasize in greater detail. But try to think about job descriptions kind of as your cheat sheet because it contains the answers to the test for getting hired for that role. They're telling you what they want in a candidate, so try your best to reflect that you possess those qualities in your application materials. Another smart strategy is to follow up on your job applications. It isn't always easy to find the right person to contact, and it doesn't always work, but following up on your job applications can help improve your chances of landing an interview because it might get them to take a closer look at your application, which is what you want. And if the job posting doesn't list a point of contact, you can try to search the company's profile on LinkedIn, specifically their people tab, to potentially find someone who might work on that team or someone in the HR department or listed as a recruiter or maybe working in talent acquisition to inquire about the role or ask if they could direct you to the hiring manager. And then lastly, you want to make sure that you have brushed up on interviewing as you search for your ideal semi-retired job, especially if it's been a while since you've had a job interview. Just like with your application materials, you need to think about your audience when preparing for an interview. So review that job description carefully and try to do some additional research into the company. This will help you determine the different aspects of your background that you want to emphasize during an interview, because it's important to take more of a, show, don't just tell approach with interviewing, meaning that you want to back up your interview responses with stories and examples from your past that support your argument that you're a strong fit for that role. And it can be especially helpful to conduct a mock interview ahead of time to get some practice. And using AI can be really helpful in finding some potential questions to consider for an individual job interview. What you can do is you can just copy the job description and go to an AI tool like ChatGPT or Google Gemini, and then use a prompt like, based on the following job description, what are 20 questions I might be asked in an interview for this job? And, of course, there's no guarantee that you'll be asked those exact questions, but considering those questions can get you in the right mindset. So as we close out here, keep these different strategies in mind because they can drastically improve your chances of job search success. Before we move into our live audience Q&A with one of our career experts, let's finish off with a few reminders and action steps that you can take moving forward. So remember to identify target roles and companies so that you can be focused and intentional with your job search. Make sure that you connect with others in your network and expand your network so that you can try to gain valuable advice or potential referrals. Always think about your audience when applying for jobs and make a plan to update your skills if you notice any gaps when comparing qualifications. Along those same lines, make sure that you are calibrating your application materials and online presence so they will appeal to your target audience. And then always stay vigilant, to avoid job scams, keeping an eye out for warning signs and making sure to vet and verify every opportunity. Okay, so we're going to turn to our audience Q&A now. As a reminder, a copy of the recording as well as resources presented will be emailed out to you within the next week, within the week, Be sure to check your spam folder just in case it gets filtered there. For even more tips, tricks, and resources, I recommend going to the FlexJobs blog. You'll see the URL there on the screen. It includes a vast amount of free articles, resources, webinars, and videos for members and non-members alike. Now we'll go ahead and open up to questions. Please remember to type them in the Q&A area rather than the chat section, and feel free to give a thumbs up to anyone else's question you'd also like to have answered so we know which are the most popular. All right, everyone. We are going to move into the Q&A portion of our webinar now. Before we dive into your questions, could someone confirm for me in the chat section that you're able to hear me clearly? I always like to check that before I start answering questions. All right, wonderful. Thank you very much for that. So, again, my name is Keith Spencer, and I am one of our career experts here at FlexJobs, and I will be answering your questions for you today. So, our first question here, this person is saying they are interested in applying for part-time positions outside of their previous field of work. They're explaining that they bring valuable experience and skills that could benefit these roles. But they are also currently retired and looking to re-enter the workforce. So, how do they make their resume and cover letter stand out given their unique background and desire for a fresh start in a different area? So, really good question. One that I imagine is relevant to a lot of people in this webinar today. So, thank you for asking it. Couple things that I would touch on here. The first thing that I'll mention is if you are already retired and are thinking about finding part-time work, for whatever reason, you want to consider how you might address that on your resume. If you go, in fact, to our resources tab here and open up the resources, the first one listed there has different samples that we provide. And in those samples, you can find example career break entries. So I would recommend in your professional experience section to start with a career break entry of sorts. Now, you don't necessarily want to, draw a lot of attention or put a spotlight on the fact that you've already retired and are deciding to come out of retirement. Not because there's any shame in that, but because people have different sort of biases and misconceptions about what that means. And you don't necessarily want employers to think, oh no, I can't hire this person because what if they just go back and retire again after 6 months or something like that? That's an unfair assumption that people might make. So we're just trying to avoid that unfair assumption. So in your career break, you would want to think about, okay, how can I tactfully explain, my time away from the workforce? You could say, an intentional pause in career to focus on, and then think about, what you've been doing in retirement. Have you been helping out with family? Like maybe you have children or grandchildren that you've been helping. Then you could say to focus on caregiving. Have you been, just spending time, trying to enjoy life? You could describe it as, maybe to focus on personal enrichment or personal development or something like that. Just kind of concisely yet tactfully explain, your time away from the workforce, but then flip it around and say, excited and energized to return to the workforce in a role that allows for blank, whatever it is that you're targeting. Kind of make it focused on the future, on the goal that you've set for yourself, on what you're working towards. Also, in that career break entry, you could incorporate anything else that you've done to remain professionally active during that time. Like maybe you've been volunteering, or maybe you've taken some courses, or really anything. Maybe you joined some professional organizations or something like that. Anything that you've done to remain sort of professionally active is worth incorporating into that career break entry. So that's the first step. How do you kind of explain that on your resume so that people aren't assuming the worst, or imagining red flags that don't actually exist? Then in terms of kind of making that switch to a new field or a new sort of area, and perhaps explaining that in your cover letter, in your interviews, what you want to do is, like I mentioned in the presentation, think about your audience. Okay, so start looking at job descriptions for the types of roles that you're targeting now, so that you can really get a good idea of what it is your audience is looking for and what they're hoping to see in potential candidates. Then you can kind of parse down the information in your resume to focus on the things that will be most relevant and impactful to that audience. And also in your cover letter and in your your interviews, when you're responding to different questions, focus on what is it about this new area, this new field or new industry that you're targeting that really excites you. If you can combine your excitement for this new field with the valuable valuable skills and experience that you bring to the table that will translate well into that new field, that can really help you bridge that gap between, your old work experience and what you're trying to target now. But you really need to focus on, what's going to matter to my audience now, what from my past is going to resonate with that audience based on what it is they're looking for. Always try to focus on the future, focus on the positives, focus on the excitement. You might even get questions about, well, I see that you're kind of switching fields. Could you explain that to me? And you could talk about, well, I really enjoyed this past work that I was doing because of X, Y, and Z, but I'm, excited about this potential change in direction because of A, B, and C. So, acknowledge the good from the past, but then focus on the positives and the potential in the future. That's a really good way to kind of bridge that gap, make that change or that transition. And then also, remember what I mentioned about incorporating like a career break entry on your resume. That should be helpful as well. So hopefully that answer provides some good tidbits there for you. But like I said, really good question. Appreciate you taking the time to ask that. And let's move on to our next question. Okay, so along similar lines here, this person is asking, how can I shorten my previous experience list on my CV or my resume, but include 2 old jobs where I stayed for a very long time and gained important experience? So one of the things, actually, I'm going to start with kind of the second part of your question here. One of the things that is important to understand is that in today's workforce, people aren't putting as much weight or as much stock into how long you have been at different jobs. So, you don't necessarily need to emphasize, like, I stayed at this job for 15 years or 20 years or things like that. People honestly like to see, employers like to see that you've gained, a diversity of experience, because that means you've been able to work with different teams, you've been able to learn new things, you've encountered different situations, and you've solved, lots of a variety of problems for other, organizations. So having a diversity of experience can be an asset, whereas, 20, 30 years ago, it might not have been viewed that way. So don't necessarily fixate on emphasizing the time that you stayed at different organizations. And the reason I bring that up is because, if you are near retirement age, ageism is a legitimate concern that you might, have in mind. So, some of the things that you can do to help, get employers to focus on the value you bring to the table rather rather than the amount of time that you've spent in the workforce is to, condense your work experience section to the most recent and relevant experiences. So usually we recommend, and this is honestly regardless of age, only including the last 10 to 15 years of work experience, because that helps you cut it down to the most recent and relevant work. Now, that being said, you mentioned that you gained important experience in those 2 older jobs that you stayed at a long time. If those, older jobs are outside that 10 to 15 year range, you do have a couple options here. The first one I'll mention is, after your professional experience section, you could create an additional related experience section where you have, 1 or 2 of those older jobs. You have like 2 or 3 bullet points describing them, just focused on the most, relevant and important aspects of those roles. And then you just omit the dates. It gives the impression like these were earlier on in my career. We don't necessarily need to talk about when, but here are the important things, the important and relevant things that I did or learned from those experiences. So that's option 1. Another option would be to not, list them sort of formally with your job title and the employer and a description of what you did, but just focus on sort of the high level accomplishments or high level responsibilities that you had in those roles, and add those to either your professional summary section or maybe right after your professional summary section, before your professional experience section, you could incorporate like a highlighted achievement section where you have, 3 to 5 bullet points with just some of your career highlights written down. But again, think about like what is going to be most relevant to my audience. Because if you are reading, a bullet point or an entry on your resume and you ask yourself the question, so what? Like, why is this going to matter to the person that I am hoping will read it? If you can't answer that question easily, well, then you either need to, rework that entry or that bullet point to make it relevant, to make it matter, or you might need to just remove it entirely from your resume. So just because you've had a lot of experience doesn't mean it all needs to be included on your resume or your CV. So again, think about your audience. What is going to be relevant to them? That's really, the main takeaway that I hope you can gather from this webinar. But good question. Thank you very much for asking that. And let's try to squeeze in a couple more questions here. Okay, so this one I think we've already addressed, but I'll make sure we're not missing anything. So this person said, they retired 5 years ago. Now they want to get back to work, either part-time or full-time. How do you present that 5-year period on the resume? Do I add retired and an effective date? So I would recommend, going with the strategy that I mentioned earlier. Just have like a planned career break or an intentional career break entry in your professional experience section. Again, if you were helping, like, as a caregiver or something like that, you can mention that. If you did any volunteering or anything to stay professionally active, you could mention that. If you just, took time off to retire and enjoy, your life, you could say, a career break focused on, personal enrichment or something like that. But, just finding a way to kind of briefly, tactfully explain it is the way to go. And, if they dig into it in an interview, they say like, oh, could you explain this personal enrichment? You could say, well, I was at a point in my career where, I decided that I wanted to, kind of take a break. So you could almost say that I semi-retired, but now I'm realize that I'm, missing the challenge. I want to be doing X, Y, and Z. Remember that focus on the positive, that focus on the future. That's how you could kind of, leverage that to your advantage rather than allowing it to be a potential hindrance for you. So hopefully that's helpful, combined with what I mentioned earlier. But good question. Thank you for asking that. All right. So I'm going to squeeze 2 more questions in here because this first one will be really quick. This person is saying, is iHire legit? I have no personal experience with iHire, so I cannot speak to that. I apologize. But I do recommend, always, when you're thinking about testing out a new platform or a new service or what have you, try to do some research, look up some reviews and things like that. So you can, find out some information from people who have, experienced it directly. I am not one of those people right now in terms of iHire. I cannot speak to that, but hopefully that is helpful for you regardless. And then our last question here that I'm going to answer, this person is saying, how do you follow up when there is no way to do so? For example, the job description, there's a URL for the application submission, but no other contact information. So yes, what you are describing is often the case. Very rarely do you see that they have listed a point of contact. There are some strategies you can take to still potentially follow up. It's not always going to work. It's not always going to be effective, but you can at least try. So the first thing that I would do is I would maybe see in that job description, did they mention who this role would be reporting to, like the job title of the person this role would be reporting to? That could be helpful information because chances are good that is either the hiring manager or someone who has, some type of say in that search process. I could then go to the company's website to see if maybe they have a directory. That's also fairly rare, but it's worth checking. If you can find a directory, you could look to see, can I find that person, that job title that the job description said this role would be reporting to? Can I find someone who's maybe listed as a recruiter for the company or working in talent acquisition? Or at the very least, can I find like an HR generalist? If the company doesn't have a directory, you could do all of those things that I just mentioned on the company's LinkedIn profile. Most organizations have a company page on LinkedIn, and most company pages have a people tab where anyone who works there who is active on LinkedIn will be listed. And so again, you could look to see, can I find the job title that this position reports to? Can I find anyone listed as a recruiter? Maybe anyone who has a job title that sounds like they are potentially on that team, anybody listed in talent acquisition or HR generalist. And when you find someone, a good way to follow up, you want to do so kind of concisely, make it kind of easy for them to help you. You could just say, hi, my name is so-and-so. I recently applied for a blank position because and then mention kind of clearly and concisely why you think you're a good fit for it. And then you could say, I'm wondering if you could direct me to someone involved in the hiring process, or I'm wondering if it's someone in the hiring process. You could say, I'm hoping to have an opportunity, or I would love to have an opportunity to speak about my fit, or something like that. Kind of the way you would close out your cover letter. So that's the approach that I would take if you can't find someone. Not always going to work. You're not always going to be able to find someone to contact. And even when you do follow up, sometimes you hear nothing back. But, it's one of those things that it's always worth trying, because it could increase your chances of success. So hopefully that is helpful for you. We're going to go ahead and draw to a close now, as we're quite a bit over our allotted time here. Really appreciate you all taking the time to join us for this webinar. I hope both the presentation and the Q&A were beneficial for you. So thank you for joining us. Highly encourage you to check out some of our future webinars. We have a really good one coming up tomorrow, which is Thursday, November 14th at 2 p.m. Eastern. It's actually with an external presenter. We're going to be doing a Q&A. His name is Chris Shute. We're going to be doing a Q&A with Chris about how to navigate imposter syndrome and cultivate a winning mindset. This is the second time we've had Chris join us, and I'm very excited for that. I will be moderating, so think about checking that out if you are interested. And then on Tuesday, which is November 19th at 1 p.m., we have a webinar called Work from Anywhere, How to Make It Happen. So definitely consider checking out some of our future webinars. Thank you once again for joining us today, and I wish you all the best of luck in your job search. Take care.